Those that are in attendance are still sort of settling and getting themselves in. For you guys that are with us online, thank you for being with us. Tonight is, always, I don't know if I'm trying to challenge myself or what, but tonight is really a deep and a heavy subject to talk about. But I think it's necessary to at least wet your, as they say, wet your feet, just to get yourself into the subject matter. And it is something that we need to think of, and it's also something that has an effect on our lives on a daily basis. So we're going to talk tonight about structural evil or systemic evil. As you know, we have the evil or sin of an individual, but we also have structural sin, meaning like apartheid. Apartheid was a form of a systemic evil that became part of a collective of us as a society. So, but before I dig into this subject, let's pray. Father God, I thank you for the truth of your word. And I thank you, Lord, that you lead us and guide us in all truth and understanding and knowledge. I pray also tonight, Father, that you'll give us understanding, that you'll give us vision, that you'll give us clarity, also to engage in this world, particularly with the darkness that we're living in. Give us the right strategies, the right way of living to overcome in this time. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, as you remember in the Garden of Eden is a metaphoric story that is so true that it resonates of all the sort of creation stories that you have in the Mesopotamian world and in the world of the time, creation stories. The story of Eden is just really different. First of all, on all the other stories, God is sort of ruler. Think of Zeus, he rules the world, and the man is his subjects, is his slaves. They have no control. He sort of laughs at them, and he pities them for their humanity. Our garden story is a story where God communes with man. He has a relationship with man. He's walking with him in a normal conversational dialogue sort of way. And just that already is just a whole different way. But like all stories, all ecosystems have a Satan. And as we've discussed two weeks ago when we spoke about the problem of evil, I explained that Satan, Beelzebub, devil, all these words that we have for the devil is not a pronoun, it's not a name. It is a descriptive name. It's like saying he's a deceiver, he's the Satan, and Satan means the liar, the deceiver. When he appears in the Job story in the courts, that is his role. It's not his name, it's not his proper name, it's like his designation, it's his position in a sense. Now, when it comes to obviously evil, we're all facing evil on a daily basis that we morally have to choose the right thing. We choose not to lie. We choose, like we heard on Sunday when we spoke about Jesus is the way. Well, what God always reveals is never reveals his particular person, never reveals his face, his eyes. He doesn't reveal, his features. What he does reveal is his way. Therefore, when Moses came, he says, Lord, I want to know your ways. God gave him the 10 Commandments. And the 10 Commandments is the sort of first abstract reality of what God's will and his priorities and his values are. And you will find that throughout the Bible that when Jesus came, he said, the Pharisee says this, let me explain God's way to you. Now, when it comes to structural evil, you can hear I'm hesitating because I have like 10 thoughts I want to go into. But how many of you had experience where you made decisions, you acted in a certain way, and only later realized that wasn't really you? You were forced to do that. If you remember when you were at school, sometimes just a systemic group power, make you do, you will go with us tonight. You didn't want to go, but eventually you did go because of that pressure, And then later on, as you age, I remember many people in our country said, I wasn't part of apartheid. It's not something that I physically did, but at times there were obviously things that I did that I was guilty of. So there's this story of a farmer's wife who loved her domestic worker. She worked for them for more than 20 years. She actually raised the children, and she's so part of the family. And the wife has given gifts and financial contribution to this domestic worker for all this time. But she shall eat outside with her own cutlery, and she will not use the home toilet. This is how it was. And that's just how you see how a systemic norm actually influence even good people who want to do good things to inadvertently do things badly, and you don't even know you're doing it just because of culture, because of the systemic evil around you. Now, interestingly enough, I remember I read this with bless you, with Richard Buerta's book on Revelation, and this really was to me an eye-opener. It was the two dragons, the one coming from the sea and the one from the land, two beasts. The one had these heads of a leopard and a bear and a lion and an eagle and so forth. So that speaks of the evil of nationalism. If you think of the bear, the lion, and those sort of emblems, there's always been the emblems of Alexander the Great. The Roman Empire was a great eagle and so forth. So even America, you look at, a nationality has always seen themselves as the greatest power. We rule over the others and so forth. The other one was the beast that had was a dragon, was a beast, but it had the features of a lamb. This, of course, speaks about false religion. And this morning, while I was discussing this chapter with my moderator, he referred to a certain lady, Martha Beck, who came out of the Mormon church, and her father was a very, very high influential figure in the Mormon church, and how he raped her and sexually assaulted her, and how she had to carry that. And it's, although she doesn't say it implicitly throughout her biography, but you can hear these sort of tones, and we've seen that. We've seen the abuse where people seemingly are busy with religious, they have high positions in Christianity or be it any religion, but then the systemic evil, they use their power. I personally have recently been invited to a church board by a victim. Well, I wish they would invite me, but a victim that was sexually assaulted, and not assault, that's the wrong word, she was sexually abused and exploited in a very close relationship she's had with the senior pastor. And he actually dosed her, gave her a chemical substance that she lost consciousness, and he actually raped her. And this is a pastor of a church, and she asked me, she says, would you come with me, or would you welcome this church, ask this church that at least they will bring this pastor, and that this pastor will stand accountable. And eventually the church board said no, they stand with their pastor, and all this is false, and it never happened, and they don't want to have any interaction of any kind. And you have these sad stories of people abusing the system, and I don't have to look at you guys. I mean, the third, which I'm going to discuss tonight, is economic systems. How many know that, Jan, I'm looking at you in the farming industry. Sometimes there are systems, market systems, channels that you have to work through that are so powerful you feel helpless. You try to argue with them, they just pull the shots and they determine how things are going to be. And so we all face this sort of systemic, where it's not just now an individual, it's now a whole system. Recently I saw a quote which was I sent to a few of my political friends, and he says, any leader will rise or fall to the measure of the system that either supports him or annihilates him. the the story is that you can be the best leader, but if you're in a poor system, that system will actually destroy you. There's no way a individual can really stand up against a system, and history is full of that. And the sort of list of martyrs who have lost the causes against, councils and systemic evil on many ways. So I quickly, in the notes, I refer, which I'm not an expert, but I mean, you guys, I think, have sort of a YouTube video analysis of what's happening in Iran. I think of Lebanon. And why I'm mentioning this is that here you had two countries that, for instance, if you think of Iran and also Lebanon, and at one point even Syria as well, had at one time a form of leadership where at least there was some kind of religious freedom, and the different minority groupings were at least acknowledged, and they could live, Jew, Christian, and Muslim could live in sort of relative peace with one another, and it was a democracy. And of course there was another form of exploitation, which was now economic, and it was Westicism, consumerism, and so forth, and abuse. And then the Ayatollah, for instance, in Iran, rise to power as a religious figure, as a savior that is going to save Iran from this capitalist groupings and exploitation of certain families who become very rich and very powerful. And he's literally the savior that says, but we need to normalize things. And he normalize the regime to the point that he actually now has full religious control. And you can't speak against the movement. I don't know if you know that Brian Adams has been ministering to Iran now for years, and he does a Zoom meeting with them on every second week. And just recently, he was doing a class with them, and there were like 40, 50 Iranians that are on the video call. And he's teaching them biblical principles, nothing political at all. He's just encouraging them. And because he's an American, they found this video and they imprisoned some of those people, saying that they're listening to American influences that is now negative, speaking against the regime, which Dr. Brian, of course, never did. But you see that kind of thing happening again where there's a system. I remember I was cutting my hair one day, and at that time, it was now many years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, and was a Palestinian, and I asked him, I said, how are you coping in our country? And at that time, I'm negative because I'm thinking of what's happening in news and the corruption and so forth. He says, I find your country amazing. I say, why? He says, you can speak against your president and still live. That doesn't happen in the sort of societies where they come from. So I do think we don't always appreciate that South Africa at least still have the freedom of press, and we still have the Zondo Commission where the government actually at least allow themselves to be criticized to that measure. We still would like to see those people imprisoned, which is another story. But I don't think we always appreciate the liberties that we still have. Now, I don't going to speak much about apartheid, but I want to speak a little bit about another systemic evil, which is BE, and because this is a debate that we're now following. And I remember, if you actually listen to the narrative, Cyril Ramaphosa just came back from the Trump meeting, which many people have various different opinions about that, and he had to account to the Parliament. Corneille Mulder from the Freedom Front Plus uses his time to ask the President, sir, what are you going to do regarding B-BBEE? B is black, broad-based black empowerment, economic empowerment. So it's B-BBEE, So, but anyway, so the President took exception that he was being asked how BE can be morally wrong and why there's nothing wrong with the system, and he sort of goes off the cuff, and he reprimands Corneille Mulder, in a way, and he says, why don't you white allow us that we also have and deserve a chance to be rich? Why can black people not also acquire riches and wealth and property and shareholdings and so forth and so forth? And, why do you want to go back to the apartheid state of white privilege and so forth? Of course, a few weeks passed away. Corneille Mulder had a second chance that he was now addressing President Ramaphosa just 3 weeks ago. And now he's explaining himself. He says, so let me matter of fact say that we as the Freedom Front Plus has always been a great proactive partner of the coalition governments, whether we were the opposition and so forth. We're always in dialogue. We are always open for dialogue, and we're always looking for solutions. He says, and he refers back to the Carnegie report in 1937, and he reads the report in Afrikaans, and he says, this report was a national document that actually said that the apartheid regime of the time said of their own people. This was not, apartheid was already institutionalized. So he says, we will not make our people too dependent on state because that's a bad thing. We must allow our citizens to have the freedom to build themselves. If they are too dependent on the state, we're actually limiting their growth. And then he says, as a matter of fact, we fully, that every single person in our country, black, Chinese, Indian, or so forth, have the right that they can, in a liberal economy, make money for themselves and profit from the economy and grow from the economy. But what we do have a problem with, and there's a recent document that just came out, that 100 individuals has already gained more than R1 trillion through BEE contracts. And this is systemically wrong, because after the 30 years of democracy, most black people are still living in abject poverty. 16 million are living in squatter camps. So that system is not a good system. We need to think of that system again. But again, Mr. Ramaphosa, our president, take a back foot, and he says, I take exception that you are still trying to, vindicate an old law that was unjust to us. It excluded us. It never included us. That was only for white people. It was not for all of us. And now you want to continue that route. And you can literally hear, after you've heard both discussions, it's like the two aren't hearing one another. And now this systemic, because remember I'm talking of structural evil at the moment, structural evil is where something obviously is wrong. If we look at our democracy, and this is something that I've now heavily researched, I have more than 20 different indicators. If you look at the democracy index, you look at the GDP to income index, you look at the growth index, you look at intellectualism in universities and how many scholars actually finish their degrees, how many of them actually gain proper position from their academics, the standards of academics, the standard of education. I mean, there's many of these sort of indexes that you can rate, and in all of them we've gone backward. We're not growing as a democracy. Yes, there's been some positives that, in terms of electricity, for instance, there's been more access to much more people, the amount of houses we've built. I mean, there's been some really good work, but systemically, we're in a lock. We need to break the system. And here's my opinion. Why would you, if you've been enriched through the system of color? So, there's only two ways to make money, and that is that you need to climb the hierarchy of impossibility. You start a small business, you face all kinds of possibilities or impossibilities, and you have to do all the certification and so forth, and you have to attend to a market and da-da-da. It's almost impossible to start a business. And then you gain a product that is worthy of people buying it and so forth. You begin to make money, and there's all kinds of things that happen against you. Now, I mean, that's a very difficult path to riches, is the path of entrepreneurship and building your own company and building your own business with very little help and trying to get some kind of finances to do that. But here's another pathway that has been mobilized, is the regime of color. You get preference, you get help, you get finance, you get all kinds of things just because of color. You get political positions, cadre positions, and so forth. And obviously that's a much bigger and quicker way to get money and to get power. So why would I go to this system? I would fight for this system. So here's we need to break this down. There's 4 things that legitimize an evil system. The first is cultural socialization. So it becomes a social norm. People begin to sound like one another, they think like one another, they talk around the braaiface, fear, or the whatever places they live, and they begin to form what we call a social construct, a social language, a social way of talking, naming, blaming, whatever they do, and that becomes a socialization. That's cultural socialization. Also has hierarchies and standards and tonight. Adichie, the very famous novelist from Nigeria, she wrote a book, Americana, and it's a novel. So it's a novel about her returning back to Nigeria, and she's just, and it gives you a keen insight in how Nigerian life looks like and so forth. And she mentions herself. She says, in their culture, and she comes from an aristocrat kind of family. Her father was a lecturer at the university and so forth, and I mean, she's a well-known novelist. But she says, in that culture, you are celebrated. You come into the room. How much have you stolen today? How did you get how much? What's the word I'm looking for? How did you infringe money from the white privilege and so forth? And a sort of, if you make it big, you are literally esteemed. You have parties of the money that's now just been acquired of, man, we got these people back because they were thieves in the first place, and it's now our turn to get money and so forth. When you hear these stories, you hear this sort of cultural debate. Now, don't look at this from another culture. We white people had our own debates. If you think about that, in the Apartheid era, we had the Broederbond, you had Afrikanism that is linked to a certain church and so forth, and if you're not part of that church, you will never gain any prominence and so forth. So we had our systemic powers that controlled culture and so forth. The second is legal validation. This is very difficult because the next step is that whenever who's in government, they obviously write the laws. And I've been speaking to several lawyers and people who are working in the judiciary. I think, I can't remember the exact amount. Santi Iman is always listening. She can maybe give this to us. But someone told me something like this, like 2,000 or more laws that has been written in the last 30 years, of which many we still don't, implement fully. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. And when something becomes law, you can begin to literally control people. The third is economic incentives. People don't do anything unless it works for them financially. And that's my previous point. That system, you can't change it because it's working for people. They're making money on that system, so they will never change because that's how they made money to this far, and why would you give that up? And the fourth is a theological or ideological distortion. And I can go in great depth of every of these sort of themes, but I think many of you will remember, particularly the apartheid thing, was that we justify that we are God's called covenant people, and we are superior, we're special, we're unique, we're God's holy people, and all others are pagan and heathen and barbaric and so forth, and we are civilization, and we're bringing that civilization to others. And that's a way how spiritual ideological, like I've just mentioned, Iran and Lebanon, becomes the norm again, becomes the system that actually holds people captive. Now, the next question I want to get into is, many people will now say, okay, who is to blame? And if the final judgment happens, are God going to judge groups, or is he going to judge individuals? Well, that's an interesting question. Now, throughout the Bible, in the Old Testament, we see God judging people. Groups of people were just destroyed, or that family was destroyed. And if you look through the kings, if the king goes against this certain man who was evil, his whole family was wiped out. So you sort of have this progressive revelation in the Old Testament, that in the Old Testament, if the group made himself guilty of something, the group was judged. But then you see a progression through the Bible. And that is interesting, that you will find In Ezekiel, I love this verse, Ezekiel 18 verse 20, and you can maybe write this down. Ezekiel 18:20 says, "The one who sins is the one who will die." And the one who sins is the one who will die. So you will see there's a definite move away from group identity judgments to individual judgment. And this is very important, because Jesus is very clear when he says everyone will stand account for their own deeds and their own works and so forth. And I think that is important. Why that is important, I think, is that possibly the greatest atrocities that ever happened in humankind is what we call group identity demarcation or scandal or blaming people, what's the word, stigmatizing a certain group and so forth. And it's just been horrible. How many of you know this? When people, for instance, if you in South Africa, the fact that you're white, you're privileged. Whether you were or not, the fact that you're white, you're privileged. The fact that you are black means you're a victim. And that's a too broad classification of a group. To say white minority capital, which is always spoken to black people, and there's a lot of literature on this, that in black consciousness mindsets, if you say today that there's reverse racism, they say, no, there isn't. Because you say, yeah, but we as whites are now, by group definition, are exploited and not given opportunity and so forth. And they say, no, that's not apartheid. That is not racism. But what you did against us is racism. Can you hear the narrative? The narrative eventually is that the oppressor is always evil and the victim is perfect and saintly. And it's simply not true. All victims also have sins. And all oppressors are also good people. They're not just only bad. And when you begin to label people as only bad because of your group identity, particularly when it is outward, and this is what happened in the Hutsi-Tutsi war and the Rwandan war, is that people were literally grouped and classified by external, because the Hutsis was usually more taller, more aristocrat kind of features and so forth. And you were, because I couldn't always check the ID, but even if that, but if you just looked like a Hutsi, you were killed. I mean, in 800,000 Hutsis were murdered within 100 days in Rwanda. And, it's a terrible thing when you go into that sort of group identity stigmas. It's horrible, it's painful, it's hurtful, because it annihilates the right of an individual or the life of an individual. Now, I want to get into some answers, because I see, I'm already half my time, and we're still unpacking the system. And I mean, I can go, guys, this is such a deep issue, because we literally face it within companies, we face it in any sort of ecosystem, whether it's government, church, economic systems, and so forth. Now, the first point, and I'm gonna give you a couple of points to think about, is how we can break down systemic evil or structural evil. So how do we begin? Because we all know it, we see it, so how do we break down? First of all, seek truth over convenience. Now, that's a quick statement, but it's a loaded statement. Every single culture has certain conveniences, norms, standards, traditions. That's not biblical. Where is a stag night and a bachelor party where you are made drunk, and that's the goal of being made? I've been on many weddings where it's not a tradition, where all the men gets up and they shoot the guy with something, whatever, and they literally mock him, he barely can make his speech and so forth. And I'm going, how? Okay, it's great, it's only fun, guys, only do it. But can you see, I'm asking, how's that really good? How's this human flourishing? I've been in weddings where I would generally ask people, and I say, you're the guests, you're the family members of this couple being married. How many of you are willing to come and stand in front and give them a word, or just a nugget of knowledge or a nugget of truth that they can carry for the rest of their lives? Zip. But let's have a stag party. And then we can drink, and then we have a lot to say. But we don't know how to affirm people and say, you know what, I think you're a wonderful young man. So we started to, for instance, change that we don't have stag parties. We have the young man who's getting married, we bring him amongst all the men in the church, and then we encourage him. We say the good things that we see in his life. We see some of the things that he needs to work on a little bit. We give wisdom out of our own marriages and lives that he can take with him for the rest of his life. And we make it an encouraging event. Don't you think that's more biblical than just going with a social norm that is just sort of the standard where everyone goes? You know, not everything goes is what everything should go. We have this thing, everything goes. But that's not always right. That's not a denominator. That's not how we should choose things. The second is experience other people's stories. I can't say this out loud enough. Adichie, the famous, as I've said, novelist, and you can go and search it online on YouTube, on TED Talk, was possibly one of the 10 most best TED Talks ever delivered. And she spoke, remember she's an aristocrat, and she grew up in a very wealthy family, and she had a servant boy that was serving the house and cleaning and gardening, washing the cars and whatever. And her mother said to her, do you know that so-and-so is actually an artist and has done some paintings? And she goes, no. And then she decides that she's actually going to travel in the village to where he stays in a much poorer area. And then she got there, she saw some of his arts, and she saw that he's a human being that has friends and family and brothers and sisters and mother and so forth. And it never occurred to her that the fact that he has a life outside of being a servant just never came up. And what she calls a single story. And we all bad in this, you know. We all see people as they come to work for us, for instance. You know, you see them in their clothes, and that's how you only know them. You don't know that they have a personal life, a church life, a political life, family life, that they also have death in the family and sickness and all kinds of things. And if you never go to experience that, you just don't know. And even if they tell you, you don't know. So you physically... That's what Jesus, you know, I love this when Jesus said to the Jewish boys, let's go to the other side. What was the other side? The 10 cities of the Decapolis. That's where he drove out the demoniac, you know, and that was pagan land. That's where the guys color their hairs and they do punk style, you know. So it's almost like Jesus was saying, let's go there. And we need to culturally always challenge ourselves to at least, and I've had this in our church where I said to our farmers, why don't you go and eat at least once a year at every single worker that works for you in your permanent workforce? Why don't you go there? Go have a meal in their house. How would you ever know how they live? How would you know how they function as a family and what's the kids' names? And because you only single story, you only see them as a worker. You never see them as a father. You never see them as Oma maybe. And that means you have to look at them differently. The next way, to me, is very important, is always request feedback always. Let me say it again. Always request feedback always. What do I mean by that? All of us are leaders in some... if we're a parent, we discipline our children. We have people above us, we have people under us. But here's the thing. Every leader should learn to say, how did you perceive that? Did you understand? Just feedback what you heard. How did you experience when I gave you that command, or I gave you this instruction, what was your experience? Now you look at me like dumbfounded, like you've never done that before. But it's something we should always do, is to request feedback. Do you know why? Because people experience anything we do differently than you send it. You send a message in this way, they experience it. Because they have all kinds of, be it noise or be it just a period of the month, or if they're eaten or not eaten, they're going to experience whatever you've been communicating to them maybe differently. And that's always why we should ask. Say back to me what I said. How do you understand what I said? Feedback to feedback is just such an important loop. Another one is challenge injustice wisely. Oh man, I can preach a whole sermon on this one. But Daniel, Esther, Nehemiah, all these sort of leaders, all of them operated in a hugely corrupt system, and they did their work with great wisdom. Daniel, for instance, I mean, he was possibly operating as a senior advisor. Listen to this. He was the organizer and administrator of the occult movement in the whole of... Let's tell you what he did. He organized the time frame of all the priests and witches, and because that was what he was administrating. Now, how the hell did he do that? Well, with great wisdom, humility, meekness, kindness, goodness, accuracy. Remember, they tried to find a fault with him; they couldn't find anything. That's how you work within a corrupt system. I love this there's not a more heinous leader possibly ever in the history of mankind than Nebuchadnezzar. Absolute narcissistic maniac. And if you listen to Daniel's responses, oh great king, rather the bad news I'll give to you happen to me than to you. He's just so diplomatic and incredible that king actually listened to him. So Daniel understood authority, understood how to work with difficult people. The next one, prioritize according to God's order of values. Prioritize according to God's order of values. There's a reason why Jesus said, you love this, I love this. You love this kind of people, I love this kind of people. Jesus was constantly telling people to change their priorities. So here's the God-given priority list that has been working for ages and generations. It's been for millennia. It's been the foundation of the Christian family. God first, family first, or husband and wife first, children, vocation, and church. That's the standard that is literally, there's new research out at the moment where families that do operate like this for generations have been proven economically more sound, economically more agile. The children find jobs, and the family take care of them and so forth, and they're just basically a much more healthier unit economically and socially and intellectually and emotionally. Now, I want to get into a few lessons that I found helpful over the years, because we're constantly, I said to, I was at the pastor's fraternal, and the pastors just got so negative about government. I said, guys, get over yourselves. There's not a biblical book in the Bible where there was a good government. Name me one. The Bible is written for people who are always under some kind of systemic, be it the Babylonians, the Persians, the Romans, the Greek. So why do we expect that we should have a good, godly, righteous government? I don't live my life and determine my choices based on what government do or not do. I have a certain cause on how I live. So the next few points has helped me over the years in terms of how I apply my time, how I apply my strategies and solutions when it even comes to political solutions and so forth. And I got this from the parables, because remember, Jesus was constantly talking about parables from nature, and nature is ecosystem. So if Jesus was mentioning something about nature, he's teaching us on how his creation actually works and how a healthy ecosystem works. And I have to say this because it's something very important, is that many people come to me and they say, this church movement, like the Roman Catholics, are evil. And I say, yes, I do agree. There's great atrocities that has happened through the Catholic Church, but I can also say that there's been also wonderful things that has been happening through the Catholic Church. So don't make, again, a group identity and just name and blame it. There's always good and bad in all ecosystems. And the analogy that I use is, whether you're a mouse or an elephant, a sick elephant and a sick mouse is bad for nature. All right, so I couldn't care if you're big or small, but a sick ecosystem, I don't want to say raise your hands, but some of you have been working for a company or a boss or some situation which has been detrimental sometimes to your health, because it's just been psychologically draining to work at that place because they're just toxic. And then you find another company you work for, and it's like, wow, this is more like family and wonderful and so forth. So that's what we want to get into. The first point, change happens within. So the parable of the leaven is where Jesus says, if you put leaven into the dough, it will eventually affect the dough. Now, the yeast. So the point is, and here's the bakers here, I hope I'm right, but once when you've added yeast to the dough, you can't pull it out again. That process has started, and eventually it will leaven the whole lump. And this is what Jesus was saying, is there's nothing more powerful, internal, relational, and gradual, like the seed of the kingdom. It's small, but once it's in the mix, it will eventually change. It will eventually bring change. So this is why Jesus will say we're salt and light. And remember, salt means we are fertilizer. You read the first, the scripture where he says, if the salt has become of no use, it will not even be used for walking on the roads, and then for the dung heap. So it actually says what salt in biblical times was used for. It was used as a help me here, a preservative. There you go. So I always encourage people, belong to as many organizations as you can, because the fact that you're there means you're yeast. The fact that you pitch up means that you can actually contribute to that system and eventually bring change. The second one, God uses small things to bring about big change. The mustard seed is a good example of that. And so God is not, I always look at people, and I've been in Christian circles, we must gain so many votes and then we'll get this evil government, voted out. And I've been in such meetings, and I'm going, I've not seen it work, guys. God is not a politician. He doesn't win by votes. He doesn't win by numbers. Doesn't win by power. Rob Bell has a beautiful analogy. He says, hammers and smells. What is most effective? So he says, some people like hammers, they just destroy everything. He says, but there's nothing as influential as the smell of roses. That smell can actually change the atmosphere. So again, small change, your individual beingness is actually the way how God changes the system. The next one, you are strategically placed by God. And it actually summarized the previous points. You have Esther in Persia, Joseph in Egypt, Daniel in Babylon. And these people were in those corrupt and evil systems. And it's interesting that Jesus tells a parable of the fig tree in the vineyard. Now, vineyard, as I understand it, is grapes. So what is an olive tree doing in the vineyard? And then he says that the farmer come and fertilize it, give it another year, fertilize it, and help it to see if it grows, and then else, if it doesn't grow, uproot it. So the point Jesus was saying is, I have placed you as olive trees in the vineyards of the world. But you better flourish. You better bear fruit. You better grow there so that you can influence those ecosystems. That's the way how God works. The moral compass is shaped by who you walk with. So some people say to me, Jon, I just want to be very peaceful. I don't want to harm anyone. It's just really me, myself, and I. And my cat and my dog and my budgie, and I just really want to not, yeah. I go, well, at least you influence those three. So the point I'm trying to make is none of us are not an influencer. We all have friends. We all have relationships. We all have children and parents or grandparents, whatever. And the fact that you have those relationships is what actually determines you. And so here's the truth. Bad company corrupts good character. 1 Corinthians 15:33. I've been saying this so many times to young people, and it's like they think they can do it differently and the results will be different. But you are the sum total of the 5 people you spend most time with. There's science behind it. You are the sum total of the 5 people you spend most time with. Because those people's thoughts and how you talk, and that really influences your whole day. So it's very important. Choose your family, choose your tribe. The next one, the true power is relationship, not positional. So Jesus, again using the leaven as an example, Jesus was saying it's the relationship with the yeast in the dough that actually has the effect. It's not a position. So, there are some truth in it that obviously if you are the mayor and the president and you have all these sort of high positions and so forth, that you have greater influence, surely. And if you are the headmaster. So that's why we pray for these positions, that God will raise up godly leaders in those positions. But how many of you know that it's not that positions that really, is the be and end all? It's the people that are in that situations, in that relationship. So I've always, over all these years, I have one power. Only one. Superpower. My superpower is my relationships. Because I try to have relationships with everyone I meet. And how many know this is true? That relationship becomes the one you can call, hey, can you do this for me? Would you help me? Would you write me? And because we have a relationship, actually I can pull on that relationship. And that's possibly our greatest human power. Lastly, God will eventually judge. It's important to say that. So many times I look at all these things that are bad around me and I see, literally, I've seen this through, you can look at it 2 ways. God has judged, bad systems has judged themselves by becoming obsolete. Does it make sense? Throughout history, bad governments eventually dissolve, break up, destroy themselves, and cease to exist. There are certain nations that doesn't exist anymore. Babylonians, no more. Persians is today Iran. But there are certain civilizations, even Egypt, which was a superpower for close to 3,000 years. And today, Egypt is a very small player, if you think about it, in the global world scale of things. And at the moment, it's really between India, China, and America at the moment. So civilizations or political groups, or what you want to call them, nations, either rise and they fall, depending on their structural evil. If they form an ecosystem that's inclusive and positive and democracy and all these sort of things, those ecosystems flourish and grow and so forth. But it's interesting that there's actually indexes. You can go look at nations' indexes. More than 200 nations, where they rank GDP, where they rank financially, where they rank in terms of health services, where they rank in crime and so forth. And you go, why are certain civilizations just getting it better? All right. So let me end. I've done this in less than an hour. You can congratulate me. So I want to ask that you guys interact at the end of the session, because it's a huge subject. First of all, to acknowledge there is something like that, and that we sometimes definitely feel powerless. I hope I've given you some little hope that we're not powerless, that we're actually very influential if we are strategically positioned in the right place and do what is right. But just the last way to say it, I literally see, let me try to put it in a picture for you, how God deals with the individual, meaning that you are an individual that is physically, biologically, intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, relationally, socially, and so forth. We have all these different aspects that makes us human. Now, if God judged that as an individual, I want to say, put whole thousands of people together, then that there's a multiplicity, multiplying effect that happens as all these sort of groupings group together, which eventually becomes this mass, this group of people that moves in a certain direction. I have there's a lot of negative stuff I can go into. Douglas Murray speaking about the madness of crowds, looking at what, the stuff crowds would do. And to me, I think that's the greatest thing I fear, to be honest. People ask me, what are you afraid of? I'm afraid of dumb, I shouldn't say the word dumb, robot-like, mindless, thinkless, choiceless, organic forms that move around to destroy the world. It is fearsome. To me, it's like you're under the plague of Satan himself to do his exploits. And we see that. We see where people vandalize, write things on walls and stuff like that. And you go, why aren't you not thinking? Why aren't you not keeping your soberness of mind to make the right decisions? So you just become a product of a system, and all wars, it's to me so sad to always see, is you have these thousands and thousands of young people recruited into war to become soldiers so that they become mindless puppets for the generals and whoever that orchestrates these wars and things. And man, that gets me depressed, to be honest. That really is something that is just so dark. But I've also said the other point tonight. If there's evil ecosystems, listen to me. If there's evil ecosystems, then there's good ecosystems too. This is how life works. Life is not only, else life wouldn't have existed. The fact that there are good systems as well. So I always have a hope in a good ecosystem, of mainly which the church is the most primary. Amen. Microphone, Effie. Het ek jou nou moeg gepraat. Marita, iemand? Jan? Yes, Marita. Jy kan maar, ja, ons sal vertaal. Dankie. Ja. Ja. Yeah, and you just do it. Yeah. It is eintlik scary, yeah. And how much of that is a choice involved? Was daar nou ooit 'n besluit? Want ons is so 'n automate, we automate. We don't even decide. We just do it. Santi Iman actually answered on Sunday. Remember, ek was say, waar David die wortels begrawe. She actually researched it. And here's the thing I didn't know. David is actually a poisonous root plant. It's not David in the Bible. Nie? So when he says David, waar David die wortels begrawe, means it's a David wortel and it's a poisonous plant, and you're actually warning someone of imminent evil, and you're warning them of something bad. You better listen. So ek vertel wat David die wortels begrawe het. So it's a very interesting, Jan.
What would be the percentage of these structural systemic evil that in the beginning was to do good, not evil?
Yeah. Professor Dion Pretorius actually does a beautiful thing where he looks at any ecosystem as positives and minuses. So he says any local town, any local community, any organization, any club, you can say, okay, let's write the positives. And you literally, he takes a map like this and he begins to pluses all over. Now the simple thing is this. You should never have more than 70% of minuses. Because that's when the minuses begins to control the positives. And they begin to negate, they cancel the positives. So you want to, it's not even 50%, you want to have 35, 37% of positives in any community, which we call emergence. These sort of catalytic right doing. We just do it because we want to do right. And on our own initiative, we go cut the grass of the school or something, or we go and help and volunteer or something. That sort of emergent is what keeps a society or a group very healthy. But obviously, when the negatives becomes more, then that diminishes. People don't volunteer for anything. That's really where we are at the moment. We're living in a very, very difficult, dark place. That is, for instance, in our community, literally Klein Willem, and we are better off than most other towns in South Africa. We even struggle to get enough volunteers for a flower show or for a police forum or for even to church. People are drawn back and so forth. So I hope I answer your question. So there is an equation where a certain positive is needed to actually begin to dislodge or change the negatives. Another thing which I spoke on Sunday a lot, which is a whole nother subject matter, is what they call the systemic loops. People are caught in systemic loops, meaning poor people have poor ways with finances. This is one of the number one courses I'm asked to go and do on farms. Help our people so that they can manage their finances, because they would go buy themselves, a television or a dilapidated car at a huge expense and debt to have that, and then they can't pay it off, or they can't get the car on the road only for a month or so, or they throw a party and they spend all their money because for them it's important to have. I'm the great guy who've had a great party, and then the money is gone. So that's the bad. So systemic evil is usually systemic actions that are enablers of that evil. And so this is what Irvin Schaller has been saying. He says, you need to get into that community like Jesus did. What did Jesus do? He healed the sick. He literally healed the sick. He did a miracle. He multiplied the bread. It's a hugely positive thing.
He made the difference.
And by doing those acts of kindness, those acts of healing, is like, wow, this is a positive. And so Jesus literally did a surprise act almost, and then people start talking and say, who's this guy? And then the systemic changes began, where he says, okay, you live morally right, you have to forgive your neighbors, you have to do unto others as you want others to do unto you. And then he teaches them discipleship and new ways and new methods.
In this country, we've had a whole group.
Mike, can we just have the mic? Just hold. I just want to get that on the mic, Audrey. There you go.
In our country here, we have a group who have removed themselves completely out of the system, and they've built their own country where they can operate as they want to, not as they've been forced.
I don't think it's totally wrong. It's sometimes, in some way, the early Christian movements did that too. They were forced to do it. Because remember, they were ostracized, they were persecuted and so forth. So they formed these little Christian communities where they started looking after themselves. And they actually took some time, because sometimes you are so in the system. I found this when I do work on farms, that sometimes, like a youth camp and a church camp, to just have people for 2 or 3 days outside of their normal can have huge impact. That you can, mission trips. I've been taking farmers on mission trips to other countries. It's life-changing, because I'm changing you into another environment. So there are some value. I'm not saying that should be the rule, because eventually you need to be absorbed. You can't existentially stay outside of a community forever. But there are a certain period for instance, children. I'm actually for homeschooling up to 9 and 11 years. Because it's good to have your child in that safe environment, and you almost keep the evil away in the formative years, particularly 7, 8 years. I think it's actually a good thing that you can strengthen the child, but then eventually you can't keep them totally outside. You need to then introduce them back into society, and you need to make them strong to be vigilant and be able to handle the challenges. Yeah. So there's a good and bad of both. Yeah. Just think practically. I'm trying to think of, your farming systems. Sometimes, we're in systems, even in our daily work, that we need to sometimes confront. Look at our onderwerp ook. And how are you going to do it? Soos John Foster gesê het, is niks verander nie, bly alles dieselfde. So let me end with this thought. Man, and an hour is just simply not sufficient. So please don't misquote me, because there's so much to still say. An interesting thing for me when we talk about just the idea of change. Most people don't change until they're desperate. It's just the truth. When everything goes well, I'm happy. But it's when the cancer hits, it's when the bankruptcy hits, it's when these sort of things happen. So, this is very important. Let me just say this out loud. Christianity is not a fairy tale. Now they lived happily ever after. Man, I wish I can shout that out. Christianity is not a fairy tale that now you serve Jesus and now you're going to live happy ever after. It's not true. I tell you, Christians, we face heartache, challenges, losses, financial losses, death, sickness, all kinds of troubles. And I've always asked the Lord, I said, Lord, hey! The Lord says, so do you have a witness? Because if everything keeps going right to the other,
no testimony.
We have no testimony. But it's because we are in those very dreadful situations and we remain in faith. We keep our eyes on Jesus. We keep on doing what is right. That's the real test, the stress test of Christianity. It's not when it goes well, it's when it goes bad. All right, God bless you. Thank you. And thank you for being online. If you have any questions, and there's also notes that you can go have a look at Harvest at Church, and then just Harvest at Cedarburg, and then just go to Bible School in Afrikaans, and you will find the new notes for tonight. God bless you guys. Thank you.